It's being critiqued by both sides of this conversation. How do you measure success if all your success is massive numbers that have no fruit? Hey, what's up, friends? Hope you're doing well. Welcome back to another YouTube episode. I'm going to be sharing with you a pretty short clip. It's of J.D. Greear. Here's a megachurch pastor, also a former SBC president, and this clip went viral. And it's kind of self-explanatory. I will say there's actually a lot here because it ties us into a different and broader conversation that I think a lot of people are not realizing. So let's get into this clip first. We'll talk about that. And then I'm going to zoom us out and talk about how the progressive Christian left and the conservative Christian right actually have a common denominator, which this video actually exposes really easily. Now, just so you know, this church that J.D. Greear leads has 12 campuses. This is not a small church. Let's go through it piece by piece, and I'll explain exactly what I mean.
It's one of the things, honestly, that irritates me about you guys that cruise in 10 minutes late or leave 5 minutes before we dismiss. It's not that I'm mad that you're missing part of the service. It's that you treat church like a religious show instead of a welcoming family that you're a part of.
Okay, this is truly baffling to hear JD say this when he and his team have created exactly what he's accusing his congregation of doing. So often in these spaces, we hear about leadership. You know, leaders set the mood, leaders set the tempo, leaders set the vision, leaders set the culture. JD has set everything that he's accusing his congregation of doing. He has created a religious show. He has created a setup where most people flock on Sunday morning to the religious show. So for him to then scold his own people for what he has trained them to do is, in my opinion, incredibly disingenuous. You designed everything this way. So I'm just kind of shocked that JD can say this with a straight face. It's like the pot calling the kettle black.
When people say that the church is unfriendly and it feels like a big production, you're the problem.
What? Let's see. Let me show you why this is a very out of line statement. Why is the congregation the problem when they created the production? J.D. Greear and his team have created the production that these folks come to every Sunday to worship. Look, watch. Okay, let's stop right there. You see this? I had done a lot of work in this kind of church world. I was part of a much smaller church, only a fraction of the size, only one campus, so to speak, and we redesigned our whole front-facing setup like this. I can tell you right now, there is easily $500,000 to $1 million worth of equipment in this shot alone. This doesn't include the building, the wiring, anything else. By the way, to even get this shot, you have to have a camera that is on a track that actually moves, okay? And then you have to have someone who has what they call a switcher in some production room where they have every single camera shot laid out on a grid and they're calling what shot they want to come up for us to see. That takes money, that takes time, preparation. In this shot, we have two different screens. That top screen could easily be what's called an LED wall. That's easily 6 figures if that's the case. On the right is a projection screen that's most likely mirrored on the left outside of this shot. You have a drum set with a cage around it. You have a keyboard. You have 2 moving heads for lighting effects. This is the very thing that JD is accusing his congregation of being. He has trained them to become spectators, consumers. And this has been a gripe I've had for a long time, way before I started the new Evangelicals. And by the way, I would love to know if you have thought about this. So please put this in the comments. I would love to know your thoughts here. But I have always thought it's so strange that we use this language of community and togetherness and we're a church on mission, but the majority of the money, the time, the energy spent, the production go towards making a Sunday morning spectacle occur. It's bizarre. It's such a weird dichotomy of our words and actions don't need to sync up. We can say that we're a family, but we can show you that we're actually a production. We can say that we're a community, but we can show you that we're actually just a glorified concert hall that has someone preach once a week. Now, I'm sure this church does other things. Most churches have other ministries that are more hands-on, maybe are part of the community in some way, shape, or form. And I'm sure once a year they brag about how many hours they gave or how much money they donated or how much food they gave away. But if you compared that to how much time, energy, spending, budget, everything goes into what you just saw in that shot, my guess is that you would see a huge lopsided template of like, here's the Sunday morning and here's where everything else lies. And so this is what's interesting about this. A lot of people in these conservative, reformed, Christian nationalist spaces blew this up and were like, JD, you should read The Room. And they use this as a way to critique the problem with modern evangelicalism. And this is what's so interesting, because there certainly is an overlap, by the way. There's certainly an overlap of progressive Christians or people who have deconstructed and this reform side. We both see the same problem. I think the modern evangelical institution, the modern entity of like this megachurch, kind of feel good, some people might say seeker sensitive movement, it's being critiqued by both sides of this conversation. People like me, who used to be more in that reform space and now are way more progressive, would say, yeah, where is the radical allegiance to Jesus? How do you measure success if all your success is massive numbers that have no fruit, that are not pushing for liberation of the oppressed or healing the lame, etc., right? And I think people on the more reform side, they would say, this is not the true gospel. This gospel is a fake gospel. It's watered down. It's not the penal substitutionary atonement. It's not the wrath of God. It's way too easy for people, etc. So it's interesting to see how there is almost a common source of how both sides of this conversation go, yes, in radically different directions, but we look at the same source and go, yeah, that's a problem. That's not good. Now, what's interesting about this is that JD actually responded. He responded to this. I have it pulled up here. So here's what he said. He said, earlier, I shared a clip from a sermon on James. It was part of a larger section on being quick to identify and reach out to disconnected people. An alone person in the church is an emergency, and Scripture calls us to be a welcoming community for those who feel isolated. I understand that some have health concerns or are serving in other areas of the church. My point was that if most of us who are part of the church come late and leave early, we are not making time to care for those who are on the outskirts of our community. Now, let me just pause right here, okay, because there's more to this tweet. How can people care for one another in a space that is designed for folks to consume? On Sunday morning, the usual flow of a typical church like this is you walk in, you grab your cup of coffee, you sit down, you consume a countdown video, a couple worship songs, a sermon, maybe a small response, maybe some more worship, and then the service ends. Maybe you say hi to a few friends, if you know people there, and then you leave. Now, in that flow, in that format, where is there time for people to be taken care of? Where is there time for the community to meet, to gather, to have the conversation? It doesn't really happen. So again, JD's critique here, where he says that my point was that if most of us who are part of the church come late and leave early, we are not making time to care for those who are on the outskirts of our community. How does that happen on a Sunday morning? He goes on to say, and yes, we have a production team. They work hard to make sure everyone is able to see, hear, and actively participate in weekend services. My greatest desire is that when we come together, we would not just consume, but actively demonstrate the gospel by building relationships. Again, look at what is shown in these setups versus what is actually taught or preached. It is impossible to say with a straight face, this is all about community, when the actions demonstrate the opposite. The actions are more in line with a concert or some other kind of play or event than they are for community. So I don't know if JD sees that. I think that frankly, you can get so sucked into this megachurch evangelical world that you don't realize that what you're saying and what you're showing are two different things. But I just find this very interesting. So he goes on. He's not done. He's not done. This was a bit of family talk and is unhelpful out of context. I am sorry for the confusion and am deleting my previous post. I do believe that many who responded share the same desire for the church, and for that I am grateful. So they actually shared this clip on their social medias, then they deleted it. So it's hard to understand the actions versus the words. This was family talk, yet we shared it publicly. I'm just not following. I'm not following. Is this your experience? Have you thought about this stuff before? I would love to know. Like, seriously, put it in the comments, because I get so frustrated by this evangelical machine that for some reason really thinks it's building disciples and it's creating community when the results are bleak. They are not good. Most people, this is according to the Barna Group in their book Unchristian over a decade ago, demonstrated that according to their research, roughly 3 out of 4 adults said that at one point they made a profession of faith in Jesus that still means something to them today. Look at the fruit of that. What has that gotten us? Trump for 2 years? An unlivable wage for most people? policies that continue to hurt marginalized people? Where is the discipleship in that? How is the world any better in America, let alone globally? I'm sure there are people doing great things, but in America, how is this Christian empire of evangelicalism doing good? Where's the fruit of that? I struggle with this because I think a lot of people have convinced themselves that they just walk down the aisle, pray the prayer, they won't go to hell, and they're a Christian. And churches, like through the Billy Graham evangelical mythology, took that and said, great, we can count this as a salvation. Oh, we baptized someone. We can count it as a baptism. But there's no long-term fruit. There's no action behind it. There's no radical call to allegiance to the way of Jesus that demands we work to make our world a better place. What does that cost people? Nothing. And I know for some people listening to this, I might sound almost too similar to the language of the more reformed conservative side. I understand that, but I still am a Christian, and I believe in radical allegiance to Jesus. I absolutely do as a Jesus follower. Now, if you're not claiming that, I don't hold you to that. Of course not. But if you're claiming to be a Christian, a little Christ, there is certainly a way. We can trace this both through the Christian tradition and through the scriptures. So when folks like J.D. Greear make statements like this, when they literally scold their congregation for participating in the very systems and church culture that they've created, I just see it as incredibly disingenuous. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give us a subscribe. I would love to know what you think in the comments, so make sure you leave a comment. I'll talk to you all next time. See ya.